Hey guys, I'm back to do another character review. Like I mentioned in my last video, this time my friend and I are doing reviews of Goofy and Max from the Goofy movies, Goof Troop, and the Mickey Mouse and Friends franchise. My friend did his Goofy video day before yesterday. I did my Goofy video the day before that, and he did his Max video the day before that. And I'm here today to do my Max video. Anyway, sorry to be a day late. I was out of town all day yesterday. But, moving on to the complaints. He's a spoiled brat, he treats his dad badly, he's a liar, he's a bad influence on PJ, he's annoying, he's a stereotype of a cool kid with a lame parent, he's rude, he's not very interesting, he's a failed attempt to update the Mickey Mouse and Friends roster, he's shallow and only likes Roxanne for her looks. He obviously dumped Roxanne immediately since she didn't appear in the sequel, and he had a new girlfriend in Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas. He's too 90s, and he's a bad role model to kids because he teaches them to be rude and disrespectful to their parents. Starting with, he's a spoiled brat. Really? Okay, I've got a question for you. Why is it that, that every time we're dealing with a, kind of rebellious, typical teenager, they're automatically labeled a spoiled brat? Seriously? I mean, this was a complaint about Ariel. I've heard this complaint about Jasmine. I mean, anytime there's a, teenager who shows any kind of rebellion towards their parents, they're automatically labeled a spoiled brat. And I think that people confuse, typical teenage rebellion and, and just being a typical teenager with being a spoiled brat. I mean, when I think of somebody who's a spoiled brat, I think of people like the kids in Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I know I've used them before, but the kids in Jessie. And yeah, even though I love her, Miss Piggy, and the reason she doesn't bother me, as I've mentioned before, is her being a spoiled brat is played for laughs. But those are the kind of characters I think of when I think of spoiled brats, not somebody who's the typical teenager who argues with his or her parent sometimes and is embarrassed by their parents. I mean, I know that as a teenager, I did plenty of arguing with my parents, especially my mom, and was plenty embarrassed by my parents. So, nice try, but, learn what spoiled brat actually means. Before you go labeling every typical teenager as a spoiled brat. He treats his dad badly. Like I just mentioned, Yeah, he does argue with his dad, and he does say some arguably rude things to him, but what kid doesn't? I mean, what kid doesn't say some rude things to their parent? And, forgive me for this, Huey, Dewey, and Louie fans, because I'm probably going to be using them as examples a lot, but when I think of, a Mickey Mouse and Friends character that treats their guardian badly, they come to mind immediately. Since, whether it's the DuckTales version or the Quack Pack version, since they seem to think it's okay to, rob their uncle and justify it by saying, oh, he's rich, he can afford it, and that sort of thing. To me, that's treating your guardian much more badly than Max ever did. Or, like in Quack Pack, throwing a wall-eyed fit, trying to get Donald to buy them a video game, then when he finally gives in, and buys it for them, and, wants to spend some quality time with them, and, play it with them, they blow him off and say that it would be too embarrassing to play a game with him. To me, that's treating your guardian much much more badly than Max ever does. Yeah, as my friend mentioned, the only time that I'd say that Max was ever kind of mean-spirited was in the sequel, but even then, I'd never say he was to the level that Huey, Dewey, and Louie were. He's a liar. Yeah, he does, lie to Roxanne about, going to the, Powerline concert. But, I mean, come on, he's not the only, Disney hero or heroine that's ever told a lie. So, I don't really see how that makes him a particularly bad character. I mean, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, I gave you fair warning, I said that I'd be using them as examples a lot. They tell a lot more lies than Max ever did. Like, like, when they, actually break into the money bin and completely empty it, spending it, all on junk for themselves, then, lie to their uncle and tell him that he's, having a bad dream while they, seek to put everything back in it. And of course, they're not the only, Disney heroes and heroines who have lied. And at least Max learned his lesson and realized that, he was wrong to do that, whereas Huey, Dewey, and Louie somehow magically managed to get all the money back in the money bin and, wink to each other. Let's never do that again. To me, that's much worse than Max, lying to Roxanne, hoping not to lose her, and, then learning his lesson and realizing that that wasn't the way to do it. Again, sorry, I'll probably be using them as examples a lot. He's a bad influence on PJ. He's probably not the best role model for PJ, especially in Goof Troop, since he, does try to get him to, cut school, and I think even one time, tried to get him to cheat on a test and that sort of thing, but at least his intentions are good. He's trying to get him to, enjoy life, as opposed to, only do what his dad wants, as opposed to only do what Pete wants him to do. So while he may not be the ideal role model for PJ, I don't really see how he's any worse a role model than Pete is, who's constantly, bad-mouthing PJ, and, telling him that he'll never amount to anything, and that sort of thing. So, at least Max's intentions are good, even if he isn't a superb role model. He's annoying. Annoying is very, 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 very subjective, so I won't get too deep into this. It's very subjective and very much in the eye of the beholder. What one person finds annoying, another person finds charming and entertaining. I mean, my friend enjoys Tangled and finds, Rapunzel to be, funny and engaging, and I find the movie to be, boring, or I find the movie to be pretty boring and most of the characters to be annoying, and I enjoy the show Phineas and Ferb and find it to be funny and entertaining, and my friend finds most of the characters in that to be boring or annoying. So it's very subjective and very individualized, so to each their own. If you find him annoying, then he's obviously not your cup of tea. He's a stereotype of a cool kid with the lame parent. Maybe to an extent. Maybe to a very small extent, but you have to remember that this is the Mickey Mouse and Friends franchise, and a lot of the characters there are very exaggerated and, stereotyped. Excuse me. And, I mean, I don't see... Excuse me. I don't see anything wrong with a stereotype as long as it's not their only... as long as it's not their only identity. As long as they actually have some depth to them. I mean, when I think of a bad stereotype, I think of, like, the original Uncle Scrooge, who was nothing but a stereotype of a greedy miser, with absolutely no depth to him. Whereas Max, while he may be somewhat of a stereotype, while he may be somewhat of a stereotype and somewhat of an exaggeration, he does have some depth to him, and it isn't nothing but the cool kid with the lame parent. I mean, he definitely does care about his dad, and care about his friends, and especially in the Goofy movies, I wouldn't so much call him the cool kid, since, well, a lot of people seem to be making fun of him, and don't really consider him that cool. So, to me this sounds like you don't really know much about Max, and that you have a problem with the Mickey Mouse and Friends franchise characters in general. Oh, also, one thing that my friend told me to mention is that he didn't mean what he said when he said that he didn't think that there was anybody in the world as greedy as Scrooge. I just thought that I'd mention that since my friend told me to mention it. He's rude. Well, yeah, he does have his rude moments. I mean, what kid doesn't? And yeah, like I mentioned before, he is probably at his rudest and meanest in the sequel. But a lot of these complaints seem like you have problems with, realistic kid characters in general. I mean, what do you expect, that a child or a teenager is never going to say anything rude to their parents? Because, speaking as someone who was once a child and once a teenager, I know that I had my share of, of rude moments. And again, forgive me for using them as another example. When I think of rude children from the Mickey Mouse and Friends franchise, Huey, Dewey, and Louie instantly come to mind. Since they're constantly saying sexist things to Webby, and constantly making rude remarks, to their guardians. Even mocking their uncle by mimicking his accent, and and that sort of thing. And when they do that, they also make fun of his relationship with Webby by putting on a horrible Scottish accent, and say something, and say things like say things like, oh, me precious wee Webbigail, how I love ye. To me, that's being much ruder to your friends and guardian, than Max ever was. Again, sorry for using them as an example, but, I've just never understood why they never get any complaints, but, so many Mickey and Friends characters do. He's not very interesting. Much like annoying, boring, and interesting are very subjective. Sorry, my throat was getting dry. Boring and interesting are very subjective, so I'm not gonna get too deep into this. What one person finds interesting, another person finds boring. I mean, I know that, like, the Harry Potter books and movies were obviously very popular, but I was never able to get into them. I always found them boring as heck. So, if you don't find him, interesting, then that's your opinion. And I'm not going to try to persuade you otherwise. But personally, I never found him boring. I always found him to be a really interesting, really interesting character that definitely has some depth to him. He's a failed attempt to update the Mickey Mouse and Friends roster, which, like my friend mentioned, is actually the same complaint that Lola Bunny had, as far as updating the Looney Tunes roster. I definitely wouldn't say that he's a failed attempt, since he is, used in a lot of Mickey Mouse and Friends products, and has been in several shows and that kind of stuff. He's obviously not going to be as prominent as the Sensational Six are. Those being, Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, Daisy Duck, Goofy, and Pluto. Speaking as a die-hard Mickey Mouse and Friends fan, let me kind of explain to you how the, how the characters in the franchise are set up. It's pretty complicated, and I'm not crazy about the setup. I didn't come up with it, I'm just explaining it. There are the Sensational Six, the secondary characters, and then the other characters. The Sensational Six, like I mentioned, are Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Daisy, Goofy, and Pluto. Then there are the secondary characters, which are the friends and relatives of the Sensational Six. Examples are like Max, Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, Clarabelle, since she's a friend of Minnie and Daisy's, Horace, since he's a friend of, Mickey and Donald's, I think the enemies of them are also included in the secondary, like Pete and Mortimer. Then you get into the other ones where the friends of the secondaries are. And the examples of those are, like, Roxanne and PJ, since PJ is a, son of Pete's and, friend of Max's. Roxanne is a girlfriend of Max's. Webby and Launchpad, since they're friends of Scrooge's, Huey, Dewey, and Louie's. Yeah, it's really complicated. I know. I think that Goldie may also be, included in the others. But how... And I think that even Darkwing and Goslin are in the others. How much, screen time and product placement a character gets depends on whether they're a member of the Sensational Six, secondary, or other. And, and since Max is a secondary, he's going to get less screen time and product placement than the Sensational Six, but more than an other. Yeah, I know, it's weird and complicated, and I'm not personally crazy about it. I mean, since I love a lot of the secondary and other characters, I wish that they would just give them all an equal amount of screen time. And product placement, but that's how it is. But that's how it is, and unless Disney completely changes the format, You're not going to be seeing as much of him as you are the main sensational 6 ones. But since he is shown in various products and since he is shown in various products and in various shows like House of Mouse and that sort of thing, he obviously wasn't a failed attempt to update the roster. You're just not going to see as much of him as you are the main characters. And, that's about all I have to say about that. He's shallow and only likes Roxanne for her looks. Really? Where's your proof of that? Why is it that whenever a guy likes a good-looking girl, he's accused of only liking her for her looks? I mean, this was a complaint about, Prince Charming, too, since, he went running over to Cinderella in the ball. I really don't think that he would have gone to so much trouble, to, make sure Roxanne didn't, oh yeah, and it was also a complaint about, Derek from the Swan Princess. I really don't think that he would have gone to so much trouble, to make sure that she didn't go out with another guy if he only liked her for her looks. So this is, just because she's good looking, it doesn't mean he only likes her for her looks. This is very nitpicky and invalid, so come up with a better reason than that to dislike him. He obviously dumped Roxanne immediately since she didn't appear in the sequel and he had a new girlfriend in Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas. Where's your proof that that he dumped her immediately? Where? I mean, yeah, I would have liked to see her in the sequel, and, liked to see her in Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas, but, that really isn't proof that he dumped her immediately. And it's really not a legitimate complaint, it's not a legitimate reason to hate Max. I think that what they were going for is that he was growing up and high school sweethearts don't last forever and that sort of thing. I don't think that they were going for him being shallow and only dumping her immediately. There's obviously no proof of that. And she did appear in a House of Mouse episode. So come up with a better reason than some weird fan theory that you have no proof for. That you have no proof of, to dislike him. Although this one isn't nearly as dumb as the one about his, about his dad having an affair with Minnie, and Minnie being his real mother, which you can hear about in my Goofy video. He's too 90s. While the Goof Troop version and the, Goofy movie version of him are definitely 90s kids, that doesn't mean that he's too 90s. I mean, if you look at versions of him that were made, that were made after the 90s, they definitely updated him and made him more timeless and that sort of thing. I mean, if you look at pretty much any of the Mickey Mouse and Friends characters, like the old black and white Mickey and Minnie that were made back in the 1920s. They're definitely products of the 1920s. So in that sense, they're 220s. But you can tell that over the decades, they've been updated into a much more timeless, into much more timeless characters than they were when they first started. And what the frick is it with this 290s complaint? I have heard more characters. I've heard more characters been criticized for being 290s than any other decade. How does being made in the 90s date something? Date a character, but no other decade does. So, I mean, just because a character was made in a certain decade or a certain era, it doesn't make it to that decade. Nice try, but come up with a better reason. And finally, he's a bad role model to kids because he teaches them to be rude and disrespectful to their parents. Like my friend said, I suppose I could see it to an extent with the extremely Goofy movie version, since that was when he was at his most mean-spirited, but while he may not be the most ideal role model, I can think of much, much, much worse role models for kids than a typical teenager. Than just a typical teenager. And I mean, why is it that people are always complaining that a character with any flaws is just a horrible role model? But then they also complain that characters that were actually intended to be role models and are pretty close to flawless are also horrible role models because they either don't stand up for themselves or something like that, like in the case of Snow White or Cinderella. I mean, he may not be the ideal role model, but at least he learns from his mistakes. And it's actually shown that it's actually shown that what he did was wrong. So I mean, I can definitely think of much worse role models like Huey, Dewey, and Louie. The kids from Jessie. The original Tinkerbell, the original Uncle Scrooge, yada yada yada. A bunch of really bad, a bunch of really bad role models. I mean, Max may be flawed, but at least his flaws are recognized as flaws. So what are you going to do? Have your kids watch a show where none of the characters have any flaws? Anyway, that's about all I have to say. Personally, I think that Max is a great character. He's definitely one of my favorite Mickey and Friends characters. I'm not quite sure where he is as far as my favorites, but he's definitely one of my favorites after Scrooge, Minnie, and Webby, who tie for my second. then Goofy, Launchpad, Goldie, probably like 5th or 6th, something like that. But you know how much I love that franchise, if you know me at all. You know how much I love that franchise, if you know me at all. I'm sorry, 4th or 5th, something like that. I definitely think that he has more depth than a lot of people give him credit for. And, like I mentioned, he probably isn't at his best in the sequel, but even then I think that he isn't a horrible character. I guess it didn't bother me quite as much as it did my friend. I guess I always chalked it up to, him being in kind of a new situation, and being stressed out by college life, and not quite knowing how to react and that sort of thing. I think it could have been handled better, but, with them giving a little bit more, reasoning behind his behavior, but I guess that's why I always figured that he was behaving that way in the sequel. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. The, link to, my first video and my friend's 2 videos will be in the description box below. I encourage you to watch them all. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye and see you next time.